Hello, my name is Sarah. I'm 34, a marketing director in San Francisco, and today I want to tell you about the dinner party where my husband publicly praised his inspiring colleague, not knowing his words would cost him both his marriage and his business partnership with me. 3 months ago, David and I hosted a celebration dinner at our Nob Hill apartment. We had been married for 6 years, and I had recently helped him launch his consulting firm by investing $150,000 of my savings and serving as his silent business partner while maintaining my full-time job. The dinner celebrated David's first major client win, a contract I helped him secure through my industry connections. I had spent weeks coaching him on the presentation, reviewing proposals, and connecting him with the right people. When David decided to start his management consulting firm, I was his biggest supporter. I provided startup capital and used my network, expertise, and evenings to help build his business. David had always been charming and ambitious, but he minimized my contributions while amplifying his achievements. I had learned to accept this as confidence rather than recognizing it as taking credit for collaborative success. The dinner party included 8 people: David's business partner Marcus, potential clients, and colleagues including Jessica Chen, a 28-year-old strategic consultant who had joined David's firm as head of strategy. I had been hearing about Jessica constantly for 2 months. According to David, she was brilliant, innovative, and exactly the strategic mind his company needed. Every work conversation included references to Jessica's insights, ideas, or potential. "You're going to love Jessica," David said while we prepared. "She has this incredible way of seeing problems from different angles. She's revolutionized how we approach client presentations." I felt irony since I had originally developed the client presentation framework David's company now used, but I smiled and continued preparing the elaborate meal. I had spent the entire day cooking, preparing osso buco, making fresh pasta, and creating an elaborate dessert that took 3 attempts to perfect. As guests arrived, I played my accustomed role, the supportive wife creating perfect atmosphere for David to shine. I served cocktails, facilitated introductions, and ensured everyone felt comfortable while David discussed his business vision. Jessica arrived on time, wearing a sleek black dress that was both professional and stunning. She was petite, confident, with an effortless sophistication that made everyone pay attention when she spoke. As we settled around the dining table, conversation flowed toward business. I served the meal while listening to David enthusiastically discuss his successes. "The Morrison Industries contract was a game changer," David said. "It validated our entire approach to organizational transformation." I bit my tongue, remembering late nights helping him craft that proposal and calls to my colleagues to arrange the initial meeting. "Tell them about the presentation framework you developed," suggested Marcus. "The client feedback has been incredible." "That framework," David replied confidently, "is about storytelling through data visualization. Instead of overwhelming clients with spreadsheets, we create narrative arcs that help them see organizational challenges as transformation opportunities." Jessica leaned forward. "That's brilliant, David. The psychological aspect of how people process information is so overlooked in consulting. You're not just presenting solutions, you're creating emotional buy-in." I almost choked on my wine. The presentation framework was something I had developed 3 years earlier for marketing campaigns. I had shared it with David when he struggled with early client presentations, walking him through the methodology over weekend sessions. "The key insight," David continued, "is that people don't make decisions based on logic alone. They need to feel emotionally connected to the outcome." I served the next course in silence, watching my husband receive praise for work originating from my expertise. The irony was perfect. I was literally serving the meal while he served up my ideas as his own. "Sarah, this ossobuco is incredible," commented a potential client. "Oh, Sarah has always been amazing in the kitchen." David replied before I could answer. She has this natural intuition for flavors and presentation. The compliment felt hollow after watching him take credit for my professional work. David acknowledged my domestic talents while remaining oblivious to my intellectual contributions. As the evening progressed, I noticed the dynamic between David and Jessica. It wasn't necessarily romantic, not yet, but there was intellectual intimacy that made me uncomfortable. They spoke the same language, finished each other's thoughts, and shared a business vision that apparently didn't include acknowledging my contributions. Jessica has this amazing ability to synthesize complex information into actionable strategies. Last week, she took a client situation that had me stumped and found an elegant, practical solution. As I served dessert, a complex chocolate soufflé, conversation turned toward future business plans and David's vision for expanding the company. The wine had been flowing freely, and everyone seemed relaxed and optimistic. "This has been an incredible year for the firm," announced Marcus. "David, your leadership and strategic vision have exceeded all our projections." "It really has been remarkable," agreed a potential client. "The results you've delivered for Morrison Industries have the entire industry talking." David beamed at the praise, settling into the role of successful entrepreneur holding court. "But David said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "I can't take all the credit for our success. The truth is, I've had incredible support and inspiration." My heart lifted slightly. Finally, I thought, he was going to acknowledge my contributions, the financial investment, the countless hours of strategic advice, the networking connections that had made his early success possible. Running a business requires constant innovation and fresh perspectives. You need people who can challenge your assumptions and push you to think differently. I set down the last dessert plate, anticipating what felt like a long overdue moment of recognition. That's why I feel so fortunate to work with Jessica. She inspires me. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood frozen behind David's chair, holding the empty serving tray, processing what I had just heard. She has this incredible ability to see opportunities where others see obstacles, David continued. Every conversation with Jessica leaves me energized and excited about new possibilities. Jessica smiled graciously, but I could see something calculating in her eyes. "David, you're too kind. You create an environment where innovative thinking can flourish." "No, really," David insisted. "Jessica challenges me intellectually in ways I never expected. She pushes me to be better, to think bigger, to approach problems from completely new angles." The room had gone quiet except for David's voice, and I realized that everyone was watching this exchange with varying degrees of interest and discomfort. "She inspires me," David repeated, his words carrying unmistakable weight. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, holding the serving tray and staring at the back of my husband's head while he publicly declared his intellectual and emotional connection to another woman, the woman who was now receiving credit for inspiring the success of a business I had helped fund and build. I set down the serving tray with deliberate precision and walked calmly toward the kitchen. In the kitchen, I stood with my hands pressed against the cool marble countertop, trying to process what had just happened. Through the dining room doorway, I could hear the conversation awkwardly resuming, but David's words kept echoing. "She inspires me." Not just the professional admiration, but the tone, the timing, the public nature of the declaration. For 6 years, I had been the supportive wife who prioritized his dreams over my own career advancement. For months, I had been the silent business partner who provided capital, connections, and strategic advice while he received all the public credit. And now, I was watching him attribute his inspiration and success to a woman who had been in his life for exactly 8 weeks. The financial investment alone was significant, $150,000 from my personal savings. But more than that, I had given him my expertise, my network, and my evenings and weekends. I had been his unpaid consultant, his emotional support, and his biggest advocate. And Jessica was getting credit for inspiring him. I opened the kitchen drawer where I kept important documents and pulled out the folder containing all the paperwork related to David's business. Partnership agreements, loan documents, investment records, everything that proved my financial stake in the company. As I flipped through the documents, I made a calculation that was both emotional and practical. I could continue in this role, hoping that David would eventually recognize my contributions, or I could take control of my own narrative and demand the respect I deserved. I picked up my phone and sent a quick text to my friend Monica, who was a partner at one of the city's top family law firms. "Are you available for a call tomorrow? I need advice about dissolving a business partnership and protecting my investments." Then I returned to the dining room, where the conversation was now focused on Jessica's ideas for expanding into new market sectors, ideas that bore a striking resemblance to a business plan I had helped David develop months earlier. "Sorry to interrupt," I said, my voice calm and controlled, "but I need to address something important." The table went quiet, all eyes turning toward me. David looked annoyed at the interruption, while Jessica appeared curious about what I might have to say. "David, you mentioned that Jessica inspires you," I began, maintaining eye contact with my husband. "I think it's wonderful that you feel inspired by your colleagues." David smiled, apparently relieved that I wasn't going to make a scene. "Jessica really has brought incredible value to the team." "I'm sure she has," I replied. "And I'm curious about something. When you talk about the presentation framework that impressed the Morrison Industries client, are you referring to the methodology I developed for my marketing campaigns and taught you last spring?" The color drained from David's face. Jessica looked confused, glancing between us. "Sarah, I think you might be confusing." "No confusion. I have emails where we discussed adapting my framework for your consulting presentations. I also have documentation of the $150,000 investment I made in your company, the client connections I facilitated, and the strategic advice I've provided over the past 6 months." The silence that followed was profound. Our guests were clearly uncomfortable, recognizing that they had stumbled into a marital and business conflict. "I think it's time for me to step out of the shadows and either receive appropriate credit for my contributions or remove myself from a situation where my work is being attributed to others." The tension in the dining room was palpable as my words sank in. Our guests shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear entirely, while the potential clients seemed fascinated by the unexpected drama. David's face had gone pale. "Sarah, I think we should discuss this privately." "Actually, David, I think this is exactly the right time and place," I replied. "After all, you chose to publicly declare your inspiration by Jessica in front of your business associates. It seems appropriate to publicly clarify the actual sources of your recent success." Jessica finally spoke up. "I'm sorry, but I'm not sure I understand what's happening here." "What's happening," I said, turning to address her directly, "is that you're receiving credit for inspiring work that originated from my professional expertise. The presentation framework David described, I developed that 3 years ago for marketing campaigns. The client storytelling approach, that came from my background in brand narrative development." "Sarah, that's not fair," David protested. "Yes, we've discussed your marketing strategies, but I've adapted them for consulting applications. That's completely different." "Is it? Because when I listened to your Morrison Industries presentation last month, I recognized not just my framework, but specific language and examples we had worked on together." I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app, where I had been documenting examples of this pattern. "Should I read some direct quotes from our conversations compared to the proposals you've submitted to clients?" "Perhaps we should—" "No, Marcus," I interrupted. Everyone here deserves to understand the full picture before they make business decisions with David's firm. I looked around the table. I invested $150,000 in this company. I've provided strategic advice, industry connections, and countless hours of unpaid consulting. I've been David's silent partner in every sense except the legal one. "You're being dramatic," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I? Jessica, when David shared that brilliant insight about client psychology last week, the one about emotional buy-in being more important than logical arguments, did he mention that we had discussed that exact concept 3 months ago?" Jessica looked genuinely uncomfortable. I wasn't aware of those conversations." Of course you weren't, because David has gotten very good at presenting collaborative work as his individual brilliance. One of the potential clients leaned forward with interest. "Are you saying that you've been an uncredited contributor to the consulting frameworks that David's firm uses?" "I'm saying that I've been David's unofficial business partner, strategic advisor, and primary investor, while watching him build a narrative that minimizes my contributions and elevates others who arrived much later." David was now visibly angry. "Sarah, you're undermining everything we've built together." "No, David," I corrected. "You're undermining everything we've built together by consistently taking credit for collaborative work and publicly declaring that other people inspire you." I stood up from the table. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to get the bill for tonight's dinner, which I planned and prepared, and then I'm going to present my resignation from this informal partnership." "Sarah, don't be ridiculous," David said, panic in his voice. "Ridiculous would be continuing to subsidize a business where my contributions are invisible while other people receive credit for inspiring my own husband," I replied. I walked to the kitchen and returned with a piece of paper, the receipt from the grocery shopping I had done for tonight's meal, along with a handwritten note. "Here's tonight's bill," I said, placing the grocery receipt in front of David. "And here's my formal notice that I'm withdrawing my financial support and strategic involvement from your consulting firm, effective immediately." The handwritten note was simple. "I resign from my role as your uncredited business partner. You'll need to reimburse my $150,000 investment within 90 days, as outlined in our financial agreements. Good luck finding inspiration elsewhere." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Jessica's wine glass clinking as she set it down with trembling hands. Our guests stared at the receipts and note on the table as if examining evidence at a crime scene. "Sarah, you can't be serious," David said, his voice a mixture of anger and desperation. "You're destroying everything over a simple misunderstanding." "This isn't a misunderstanding, David," I replied, gathering the dinner plates. "This is the natural consequence of a pattern that's been developing for months." Rebecca, the potential client, spoke up. "I think perhaps we should give you two some privacy to work this out." "Actually," I said, continuing to clear the table, "I think you all deserve to know exactly what you're potentially partnering with. David's presentation skills are excellent, but a significant portion of his strategic frameworks and client insights have come from our collaboration. Collaboration he's consistently failed to acknowledge." Marcus looked like he was having a panic attack. "Sarah, surely we can find a way to resolve this professionally." "We can," I agreed. "David can start by being honest about his sources and either giving appropriate credit or returning my investment so I can pursue opportunities where my contributions are valued." Jessica finally found her voice. "I had no idea that there were pre-existing strategic partnerships. David, you never mentioned that Sarah was involved in developing the business frameworks." "Because I adapted them," David insisted, but his protest sounded weak. "Taking inspiration from different sources and creating new applications is what consultants do." "That would be true," I said, "if you were acknowledging your sources and sharing credit appropriately. Instead, You've been presenting collaborative work as individual achievement while publicly declaring that someone else inspires you. I turned to Jessica directly. How many of David's strategic insights have you found yourself building upon because they seemed to align perfectly with established marketing principles? Jessica hesitated, then answered honestly. Actually, quite a few. I did wonder why his approach to client psychology was so sophisticated for someone without a marketing background. Because it's not his approach, it's mine, adapted for consulting applications. So what happens now? Asked Marcus, clearly worried about the business implications. Now David has a choice. He can restructure the business to properly acknowledge and compensate my contributions, or he can buy out my investment and find new sources of strategic insight. You're being completely unreasonable, David finally exploded. Yes, we've collaborated, but that's what married couples do. You can't hold that over my head and demand credit for every conversation we've had. You're right. Married couples do collaborate, but they also support each other, acknowledge each other's contributions, and don't publicly declare that other people provide their inspiration. As I headed toward the kitchen with the last of the dishes, I heard Jessica say quietly, "David, I think we need to have a serious conversation about attribution and business ethics." The irony wasn't lost on me that Jessica, the woman David had just declared as his inspiration, was now questioning his integrity based on my revelations. From the kitchen, I could hear the guests beginning to leave, their conversations muted, but clearly uncomfortable. David was trying to salvage the situation, but the damage had been done. 6 months later, as I sit in my new corner office overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge, I reflect on how dramatically my life has changed since that dinner party. David eventually reimbursed my $150,000 investment, though it required lawyers and heated negotiations. What surprised me was how quickly the business community responded to my story. Within weeks, I received calls from 3 consulting firms interested in hiring me as a senior consultant. "We've been watching David's work for months," explained Jennifer Walsh, managing partner at Strategic Solutions Group. "Some of our teams suspected the sophistication of his frameworks suggested collaboration, but we couldn't figure out with whom. When we learned about your background, everything made sense." I accepted a position as Director of Strategic Innovation, with equity participation and clear attribution for my work. For the first time in years, I was receiving credit and compensation matching my contributions. David's business struggled after my departure. Without my strategic input and network connections, he found it difficult to maintain the innovation and client satisfaction that had defined his early success. Marcus eventually bought him out and restructured the firm. Jessica left 3 months after our dinner party. Once she understood the true source of many strategic insights, she lost confidence in David's leadership. She sent me a thoughtful email apologizing for unknowingly benefiting from my unacknowledged work. The divorce proceedings were straightforward. David tried claiming my consulting income was marital property, but my lawyer established that my new position was based on expertise I had developed independently. The most satisfying part isn't the salary increase or corner office. It's the daily experience of having my ideas valued, attributed, and built upon in ways that advanced my career rather than someone else's. Your approach to client psychology has revolutionized how we structure presentations, Jennifer told me during my 6-month review. Client feedback has been consistently positive about the emotional engagement aspect. I still think about that dinner party sometimes, particularly David's declaration that Jessica inspired him. What he failed to understand was that inspiration without attribution is just intellectual theft dressed up as admiration. The woman he thought inspired him was actually building on foundations I had laid, using frameworks I had developed, applying principles I had taught him. True inspiration acknowledges its sources and builds credit rather than claiming it. Today, when someone asks about the most important lesson I've learned about business partnerships, I tell them about the night I served dinner and resignation simultaneously. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop serving others and start serving yourself the respect you deserve. David was right about one thing. He did need inspiration to build a successful business. He just failed to recognize that his greatest inspiration had been sitting across from him at the dinner table for 6 years, waiting to be acknowledged. If this story shocked you, just wait for what's next. Leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and of course, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss a single notification.